Hello and welcome to the Whispering Worlds channel. Have you ever wondered how far one can go to rebuild a life torn apart by betrayal? In this gripping tale, you have the chance to dive deep into Jake's journey, a man blindsided by infidelity, left to pick up the pieces for his son, Ethan. What choices would you make if faced with a shattered family? Would you forgive, seek revenge, or forge a new beginning? This story invites you to reflect, engage, and see yourself in the decisions that shape their future. It was a Saturday morning, and the early spring sun poured through the windows of our suburban home in Arlington, Virginia. The air was thick with anticipation as we prepared for my son Ethan's 12th birthday party. Balloons, streamers, and the faint aroma of freshly baked chocolate cake filled the house. Ethan, a lively and bright-eyed boy with a mop of messy brown hair, buzzed around, his excitement contagious. I couldn't help but smile as I watched him. "Dad, don't forget the extra candles. You know 12 isn't enough. I need one for good luck." "Got it, champ," I said, ruffling his hair before heading to the kitchen to grab the lighter. My wife, Lisa, stood at the counter, arranging snacks on a platter. She looked stunning, as always, with her blonde hair tied back in a neat ponytail and wearing the sapphire blue blouse I had bought her last Christmas. But lately, something about her felt distant, like a shadow lingered behind her every word. "Everything okay?" I asked, sensing her distraction as she adjusted the snacks for the third time. "Yeah, just making sure everything's perfect," she said with a tight smile. "Ethan's been looking forward to this for weeks." "He's not the only one," I replied, trying to lighten the mood. But Lisa had already turned her attention back to the platter. I shrugged it off and went to check on the backyard setup. Guests began arriving by noon. Friends from Ethan's school, a few neighbors, and some of our closest friends trickled in, their laughter and chatter blending into a cheerful symphony. Among them was Marcus, Ethan's godfather and my childhood best friend. Marcus was the life of every party. His booming laugh and easy charm instantly drew people in. "Happy birthday, buddy," Marcus said, pulling Ethan into a bear hug and handing him a brightly wrapped gift. Ethan's face lit up as he ripped open the paper to reveal a remote-controlled drone. "Whoa, this is awesome. Thanks, Uncle Marcus," Ethan exclaimed, running off to show his friends. Marcus turned to me, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "Another year older, huh? You're raising a fine young man, Jake." "Thanks, man," I said. "Couldn't have done it without you being such a great role model." We laughed, but as the afternoon wore on, I noticed subtle glances exchanged between Marcus and Lisa. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination, but a nagging doubt began to take root. It wasn't until we gathered around the table for cake that things took a turn. "Make a wish, Ethan," Lisa said, placing the cake in front of him. The room erupted in cheers as Ethan blew out the candles in one confident breath. "Good lungs on that kid," Marcus joked, raising his glass. "He'll make a great athlete one day, just like his mom always says." The words seemed innocent enough, but Lisa's face turned pale. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up her fork. It wasn't just the comment. It was the way Marcus said it, with an intimacy that didn't belong in a friendly jest. A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean, Marcus?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. He hesitated, his usual confidence faltering for a split second. "Oh, nothing. Just that Lisa's always talking about how athletic Ethan is. In passing." Lisa's fork clattered onto her plate. She forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "Marcus is just being silly. Don't mind him." But I did mind. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, though I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was off. After the guests left and Ethan went to bed, I confronted Lisa in the kitchen. "What was that about?" I demanded, crossing my arms. "What was what about?" she replied, feigning innocence. "You know what I'm talking about." Marcus's comment. "The way you reacted. Is there something going on between you two?" Lisa's eyes widened, but she quickly regained her composure. "Don't be ridiculous, Jake. You're overthinking it." "Am I?" I shot back. "Because something doesn't add up." And I'm not the only one who noticed. Her lips tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might confess. But instead, she stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with my doubts. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the pieces began to come together. Marcus's lingering glances, Lisa's defensiveness, and the way they both seemed to share an unspoken connection. I didn't want to believe it, but the truth was beginning to stare me in the face. Little did I know, the storm brewing beneath the surface was about to erupt, changing our lives forever. The week after Ethan's birthday felt like trudging through quicksand. Lisa's mood shifted from icy silence to forced cheerfulness, and the tension between us grew thicker with each passing day. I buried myself in work, trying to avoid the gnawing suspicion that wouldn't leave me alone. But some things are impossible to ignore. It was Friday evening when the pieces began to fall into place. Ethan was at a sleepover, giving Lisa and me the house to ourselves. She had spent most of the day out, saying she had errands to run. By the time she returned, I was already in the living room nursing a beer, trying to distract myself with a basketball game on TV. "Hey," she said, walking in with shopping bags. "Hey," I replied without looking at her. "Get everything you needed?" "Yeah, just some groceries and a new blouse," she said, dropping the bags by the door. Her tone was overly casual, as if she were trying too hard to sound normal. I couldn't take it anymore. "Lisa," I said, muting the TV and turning to face her. "We need to talk." She froze for a split second, then forced a smile. "What about?" "You know what?" I said, my voice firm. "Marcus." Her smile faltered. "Jake, I told you, there's nothing going on." "Then why have you been acting so strange?" I demanded. "Ever since the party, you've been walking on eggshells around me. And Marcus, he knows things about you that he shouldn't." Her eyes darted to the floor, and she crossed her arms defensively. "You're being paranoid. He's your best friend. Why would you even think that?" "Because I'm not blind, Lisa," I snapped. "I see the way he looks at you, the way you two exchange those glances when you think no one's watching. If there's nothing going on, then why can't you look me in the eye right now?" Silence hung in the air like a ticking time bomb. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jake, I didn't mean for it to happen." My stomach dropped. The words hit me like a freight train. "What didn't you mean to happen?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Tears welled up in her eyes. "It was a mistake. A stupid, horrible mistake. I never wanted to hurt you." I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. "How long?" I demanded. "How long has this been going on? Jake, please." "How long?" I repeated, my voice shaking. She hesitated, then finally said, "About a year. A year. My best friend and my wife. For an entire year." The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. I stood up, pacing the room as the weight of her confession settled over me. "Why?" I asked, turning to face her. "Why would you do this? Was I not enough for you? Was our family not enough?" "It's not like that," she said, her voice cracking. "It's not about you. Marcus and I, it just happened. I can't explain it." I let out a bitter laugh. "It just happened? That's the best you can come up with? You threw away our marriage, our family. For what? Some thrill?" Tears streamed down her face. "I made a mistake, Jake. I regret it every single day. Please, can't we just move past this?" "Move past this?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You think I can just forget that you've been sleeping with my best friend? That's not a mistake, Lisa. That's a choice. A series of choices over and over again for an entire year." She sobbed quietly, but I felt no sympathy. My heart was too broken to feel anything but anger and betrayal. I needed answers, and there was only one other person who could give them to me. Without another word, I grabbed my jacket and stormed out of the house. Lisa called after me, but I didn't look back. I drove to Marcus's place, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. When I arrived, he opened the door with his usual grin, but it faded as soon as he saw the look on my face. Jake, he said cautiously. What's going on? I didn't bother with pleasantries. You know damn well what's going on, I said, stepping inside and slamming the door behind me. Lisa told me everything. His face paled. Jake, I can explain. Oh, please do, I said, crossing my arms. Explain how you betrayed your best friend. Explain how you could look me in the eye, laugh with me, share drinks with me, all while screwing my wife behind my back. He stammered, searching for words. It wasn't supposed to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. Funny? I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Lisa said the exact same thing. You two really are perfect for each other. Jake, please, he said, stepping closer. You have to believe me. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything? I repeated, my voice rising. You destroyed my marriage, my trust, and you have the audacity to say it didn't mean anything? Marcus lowered his head, unable to meet my gaze. I felt a surge of satisfaction at his discomfort, but it was quickly overshadowed by the pain of his betrayal. You're not the man I thought you were, I said, my voice cold. You're not my friend. You're nothing to me. I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I drove home, the weight of everything hit me like a tidal wave. My marriage was in shambles, my best friend was a stranger, and my heart felt like it had been ripped from my chest. But one thing was certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next few days passed in a haze. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and suffocating. Ethan was back home, oblivious to the storm brewing between Lisa and me. I did my best to shield him from the tension, but children are more perceptive than we give them credit for. Dad, is everything okay? He asked one evening as I helped him with his math homework. I forced a smile. Of course, buddy. Why do you ask? He hesitated, twirling his pencil. You and Mom seem different. My heart sank. Sometimes grown-ups have tough days just like kids do, but it doesn't mean we don't love you. Okay? He nodded, but the worry in his eyes lingered. I ruffled his hair, trying to reassure him, but inside, I was falling apart. Later that night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Lisa approached me in the living room. She looked pale, her usual confidence replaced by a tentative nervousness. Jake, she began softly. We need to talk. Talk, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Now you want to talk? She flinched but pressed on. I know I've hurt you, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life, but we need to figure out where we go from here, for Ethan's sake. The mention of Ethan made my anger simmer down, replaced by a crushing sadness. Where do we go from here, Lisa? How do you expect me to move past what you and Marcus did? I don't, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. I don't expect you to forgive me, but we have a son, Jake. He needs both of us. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Ethan does need us. But what kind of example are we setting if we stay together in this mess? Lisa sank into the armchair across from me, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Just tell me what you need. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the woman I once loved felt like a stranger, and the life we had built together was crumbling around us. The next morning I called Marcus. I had spent the entire night wrestling with my emotions, but one thing was clear. I needed closure. He answered on the second ring, his voice wary. Jake, he said, I didn't think I'd hear from you. We need to talk, I said curtly. In person. There was a pause. Okay. When and where? Now. Meet me at the park by my place. An hour later, we sat on a bench near the playground where Ethan often played. The laughter of children felt like a cruel contrast to the weight of our conversation. Jake, Marcus began. I'm sorry. For everything. If I could take it back, I would. But you can't, I said, my voice cold. Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just betray me. You betrayed Ethan. You were his godfather, Marcus. He looked up to you. He lowered his head, shame etched across his face. I know. and I hate myself for it. But Lisa and it wasn't about love or a future. It was a mistake. A selfish, stupid mistake. I clenched my fists, the urge to hit him bubbling beneath the surface. But violence wouldn't solve anything. Why? Why risk everything? He hesitated before answering. I was lonely, Jake. I've been struggling with my own demons, and Lisa, she was there. It doesn't excuse what I did, but that's the truth. I shook my head, disgusted. Lonely? Struggling? You could have come to me, Marcus. That's what friends do. But instead, you went behind my back. He nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. You're right. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said, standing up. You and Lisa made your choices. Now I have to make mine. I walked away, leaving Marcus alone on the bench. As I reached my car, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and a strange sense of relief. The confrontation hadn't provided the closure I wanted, but it gave me the clarity I needed. That evening, I sat down with Lisa after Ethan had gone to bed. I've made a decision, I said. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. What is it? I'm filing for divorce. Her face crumpled, and she began to cry. But I didn't waver. We can't keep pretending, Lisa. This isn't just about us. It's about Ethan, too. He deserves a stable home, even if it's a broken one. She nodded through her tears. I understand, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this as easy as possible for him. It was the first time in weeks that we were on the same page. But it didn't make the decision any less painful. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about the future. The road ahead would be difficult, but I was determined to put Ethan first. He was my anchor, the reason I would find the strength to rebuild. The bonds I once held dear had been shattered, but in their place, I would forge something new, for myself and for my son. The papers were filed within a week. Sitting in the sterile office of my lawyer, I signed the documents that officially marked the end of my marriage. Lisa had agreed to the terms without a fight. I think she knew that resisting would only prolong the inevitable. As much as it hurt to see our life together reduced to legal jargon and signatures, I felt an odd sense of relief. This was the first step toward moving on. But moving on was easier said than done. Ethan took the news better than I expected, but not without questions. Lisa and I sat him down in the living room, trying our best to explain without giving away too much. Are you and Mom mad at each other? He asked, his voice trembling. Lisa and I exchanged a glance. Sometimes adults grow apart, I said gently. But that doesn't change how much we both love you. Ethan's lip quivered, but he nodded. So, you're not going to live together anymore? No, buddy, Lisa said, her voice thick with emotion. But you'll still see both of us. We'll always be here for you. I reached over and squeezed his hand. This isn't your fault, Ethan. Never think that. Okay? He nodded again, but the sadness in his eyes was unmistakable. Killed me to see him hurting, but I knew this was the only way forward. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into creating a new normal. Ethan and I moved into a modest two-bedroom apartment not far from his school. The place was smaller and less polished than the house we'd left behind, but it was ours. I let Ethan pick out decorations for his room, and he chose posters of his favorite basketball players and a vibrant blue comforter that matched his cheerful personality. What do you think? He asked as we finished setting up his bed. I think it's perfect, I said, ruffling his hair. For the first time in days, he smiled, and it felt like a small victory. Work became my refuge. My colleagues at the architecture firm were sympathetic but professional enough not to pry. I appreciated their quiet support. My boss, Greg, gave me a lighter workload for a while, understanding that I needed time to adjust. It was during one of those long days at the office that I reconnected with an old friend, Sarah. Sarah had been a fellow architect at the firm before moving to another city a few years ago. She was back in town for a project, and when we bumped into each other in the break room, her face lit up. Jake? Is that you? She exclaimed, her auburn hair bouncing as she pulled me into a quick hug. "Sarah, it's been ages," I said, genuinely happy to see her. We spent the next half hour catching up, and for the first time in weeks I found myself laughing. Sarah had always had a way of making people feel at ease, her sharp wit and warm smile a balm for any bad day. "So, how's life?" she asked, her tone light but curious. I hesitated, then decided to be honest. "It's been a rough few months. Lisa and I split up." Her face softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. How are you holding up?" "One day at a time," I said with a shrug. "Ethan's been my anchor through it all." "He's lucky to have you," she said sincerely. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." I nodded, grateful for her kindness. As she walked away, I couldn't help but feel a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was life beyond the wreckage. Meanwhile, Lisa was struggling. She had stayed in the house, but it no longer felt like a home. Marcus had distanced himself after our confrontation, and Lisa's once vibrant social circle had grown eerily quiet. I heard from mutual friends that she'd taken some time off work and was seeing a therapist. Part of me felt sorry for her, but I quickly pushed the thought away. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Ethan's weekends with Lisa were awkward at first. He'd come back subdued, his usual chatter replaced by one-word answers. I didn't pry, but one night, as I tucked him in, he finally opened up. "Mom seems sad," he said, looking at me with wide, worried eyes. "She's going through a tough time," I said carefully. "But she loves you, Ethan. Never forget that." He nodded, but the crease in his brow remained. "I just want everyone to be happy again." My chest tightened. "Me too, buddy. Me too." As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel a sense of stability returning to our lives. Ethan thrived at school, joining the basketball team and making new friends. I attended every game, cheering him on from the sidelines. Watching him on the court, so full of energy and determination, gave me hope for the future. I started meeting Sarah for coffee occasionally, our conversations a welcome escape from the weight of my responsibilities. She never pushed, never pried, but her presence was a reminder that life could still hold moments of joy and connection. One evening, as I sat on the couch reviewing blueprints for a new project, Ethan plopped down beside me, his face glowing with excitement. "Dad, guess what?" "What?" I asked, smiling at his enthusiasm. "Coach says I'm starting in the next game." "That's amazing, Ethan. I'm so proud of you." He beamed, and in that moment, I realized that despite everything, we were going to be okay. Our lives weren't perfect, but they were ours to rebuild. Piece by piece, we were finding our way forward. Spring melted into summer, and with it came a renewed sense of routine for Ethan and me. Life wasn't perfect, but it was livable, and that was more than I could have hoped for in those early days after the divorce. The scars were still there, but they had started to scab over, the pain dulled by time and the steady rhythm of daily life. Ethan's basketball team was on a winning streak, and he spent most of his free time practicing drills or watching highlight reels of his favorite players. I found myself cheering louder than anyone at his games, my voice hoarse by the end of each one. It felt good to have something to celebrate, something to remind us both that life could still bring joy. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling game where Ethan's team clinched a narrow victory, Sarah joined us for ice cream. She had been attending the games more frequently, always sitting a few rows away but cheering just as enthusiastically. "Great game, Ethan," she said as we settled onto a bench outside the ice cream parlor. "That three-pointer in the last minute was clutch." Ethan grinned, his face smeared with chocolate. "Thanks. Coach said it was all about confidence. He always tells us to trust our training." Sarah laughed. "Smart coach. Confidence will take you far." I watched their interaction with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. Sarah had slipped into our lives with an ease that felt almost too natural. She had become a steady presence, offering friendship and support without ever pushing for more. But lately, I had started to wonder if there could be more. "What about you, Jake?" Sarah asked, pulling me from my thoughts. "What's your secret to staying calm during those nail-biter games?" I chuckled. Who says I'm calm? I'm a nervous wreck. I just hide it well. Ethan laughed, chiming in. He yells at the TV when we're watching games at home. It's hilarious. Sarah's eyes sparkled with amusement. Sounds like someone's passionate about the sport. Maybe Ethan gets it from you. Her words lingered in my mind long after we parted ways that evening. Could there really be a chance for something new? Or was I simply grasping for a lifeline in the wake of my broken marriage? While I wrestled with these questions, Lisa was navigating her own path. She had reached out a few times, mostly about logistics, pickup times for Ethan, school events, and the like. Our conversations were civil but distant, the warmth we once shared replaced by a strained politeness. One evening, she called unexpectedly. Jake, do you have a minute? I hesitated, caught off guard. Sure. What's up? She sighed, the sound heavy with emotion. I wanted to say thank you for being so understanding about everything. I know I don't deserve it. Her words took me by surprise. Lisa, it's not about deserving. It's about doing what's best for Ethan. He's the priority. I know, she said softly. But it means a lot. I've been seeing someone, a therapist. She's helping me work through some things. I wasn't sure how to respond. That's good. I hope it's helping. It is, she said. And I just wanted you to know that I'm trying. For Ethan and for myself. We ended the call shortly after, but her words stayed with me. Maybe she truly was trying to change. Maybe, in her own way, she was finding a path to redemption. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her fully, but I hoped she would find peace. As the summer wore on, my connection with Sarah deepened. We spent more time together, often with Ethan in tow. She had a way of making him laugh that warmed my heart, and her presence brought a lightness to my days that I hadn't felt in years. One evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, Sarah stayed for dinner. We sat on the balcony, the warm breeze carrying the scent of freshly grilled steaks. The conversation flowed easily, as it always did, but there was an unspoken tension in the air. Jake, she said, her voice hesitant. Can I ask you something? Of course, I said, meeting her gaze. Are you ready? She asked, her expression serious. For something new, I mean. Her question caught me off guard, but I didn't shy away from it. I don't know, I admitted, but I know that being around you feels good. Like I'm starting to remember who I used to be. A small smile tugged at her lips. That's a good start. We talked late into the night, the boundaries of our friendship beginning to blur. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Ethan's basketball season ended with a championship win. The team celebrated with a party, and I watched with pride as my son basked in the glow of their victory. He had grown so much in the past year, his resilience a constant source of inspiration. As we drove home that night, Ethan looked over at me and smiled. Thanks for always being there, Dad. My throat tightened, and I reached over to ruffle his hair. Always, buddy. Always. Life wasn't perfect, but it was moving forward. And for the first time, I was ready to move with it. The warmth of summer began to fade, giving way to the crisp air of autumn. Leaves turned shades of amber and crimson, blanketing the streets in a patchwork of color. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm for Ethan and me, though I couldn't ignore the subtle shifts happening around us. Sarah and I had grown closer, our friendship deepening into something that felt unmistakably more. Yet we hadn't put a name to it. It was as if both of us were afraid to break the fragile equilibrium we'd found. Ethan adored her, often asking when she'd visit next, and I couldn't deny how much lighter my days felt with her around. But there was a lingering shadow I couldn't shake. Marcus. One Saturday morning, as I sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee and reviewing blueprints, my phone buzzed. Seeing Marcus's name on the screen was like a punch to the gut. I hadn't spoken to him since our confrontation months ago. Reluctantly, I answered. Hello, Jake. His voice was hesitant, almost timid. Hey, I wasn't sure if you'd pick up. What do you want? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He hesitated. I wanted to check in. See how you and Ethan are doing. We're fine, I said curtly. Is that all? Jake, please, he said, his voice pleading. I know I don't have the right to ask, but I need to say this. I'm sorry. I've been working on myself, trying to understand why I did what I did. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I need you to know that I'm trying to be better. I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to hang up, to shut him out completely. But another part, the part that valued the years of friendship we'd shared, hesitated. I appreciate the apology, I said finally. But Marcus, you have to understand that things can't go back to the way they were. Too much has happened. I understand, he said quietly. I just wanted you to hear it from me. Take care of yourself, Jake. And Ethan too. I hung up, my mind swirling with conflicting emotions. The conversation had reopened wounds I thought were beginning to heal, but it also brought a strange sense of closure. Maybe Marcus truly was trying to change. Maybe that was enough for him, if not for me. That evening, Sarah came over for dinner. She brought a bottle of red wine and a freshly baked pie, her smile lighting up the room as she walked in. Hey, you too, she said, ruffling Ethan's hair as he played with his basketball in the living room. What's on the menu tonight? Spaghetti, I said, gesturing to the simmering pot on the stove. Ethan's request. Good choice, she said, winking at him. You've got great taste. Dinner was lively, filled with laughter and stories. Ethan recounted a hilarious moment from practice, and Sarah chimed in with anecdotes from her own childhood. For a little while, it felt like we were a family, a thought that both comforted and unsettled me. After Ethan went to bed, Sarah and I sat on the couch, the half-empty wine bottle between us. The air was thick with unspoken words, and I knew we couldn't avoid the conversation any longer. Jake, she said softly, her eyes searching mine. Can I ask you something? Of course, I said, though my heart raced in anticipation. Do you think you'll ever forgive her? Lisa, the question caught me off guard. I took a deep breath, considering my answer. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to, for Ethan's sake. But another part, I'm not sure I can. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, you know. It just means letting go of the anger so it doesn't eat you alive. Her words struck a chord. I had been holding on to my anger like a shield, using it to protect myself from the pain. But maybe it was time to start letting go. What about you? I asked, shifting the focus. What are you looking for? She smiled faintly. Something real. Something honest. I've spent too much time settling for less. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I grew closer. We didn't rush things, letting our relationship evolve naturally. She became a regular presence in our lives, her laughter and warmth a balm for the lingering scars of the past. One evening, as we walked through the park with Ethan, he turned to me with a question that stopped me in my tracks. Dad, do you think Sarah will be around forever? I looked at him, then at Sarah, who smiled softly but said nothing. I crouched down to meet Ethan's gaze. I hope so, buddy. But some things take time to figure out. What matters is that we're happy right now. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. As we continued walking, I took Sarah's hand in mine, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Life was still messy, still unpredictable. But for the first time, I felt like I was on the right path. One step closer to healing, to rebuilding, to finding a new kind of happiness. As the leaves continued to fall, covering the streets in hues of gold and rust, I found myself reflecting more often. The crisp autumn air had a way of clearing my thoughts, sharpening them like a blade. I had worked hard to build a new life for Ethan and myself, but there were still pieces of the past that refused to stay buried. It started with an email from Lisa. Short, simple, and to the point. Jake, we need to talk. It's about Ethan. Can we meet? My chest tightened as I read her words. We had managed to keep our interactions strictly about logistics since the divorce, and I preferred it that way. Still, I couldn't ignore the possibility that this was important. I replied with a single line. Tomorrow at noon. The diner on Main Street. The next day, I arrived at the diner early. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, mingling with the low hum of conversations. I chose a booth near the window, where the sunlight streamed in, warming the worn leather seats. Lisa arrived a few minutes later. She looked different, not in a drastic way but enough for me to notice. Her once polished demeanor had softened. She seemed more subdued, even vulnerable. She offered a tentative smile as she slid into the seat across from me. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, her voice quieter than I remembered. I nodded. "What's this about?" She took a deep breath, fiddling with the edge of her napkin. "It's Ethan. He's been asking questions about us, about why we split up." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always known this moment would come, but I hadn't prepared for it. "What did you tell him?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "Nothing yet," she said quickly. I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to tell him the truth. "Not without talking to you first." I sighed, leaning back against the booth. "He's 12, Lisa. He doesn't need to know the details. All he needs to understand is that we couldn't make it work." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "I agree, but he's not a little kid anymore. He's smart, Jake. He can sense when we're not being honest." I ran a hand through my hair, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "So what do you suggest? That we tell him everything? That we explain how you—" I stopped myself, the words hanging in the air like a loaded gun. Lisa's face crumpled, and she looked down at her lap. "I'm not proud of what I did," she said softly. "But he deserves to hear something from us. Together." Her vulnerability caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the woman I had once loved, the mother of my child, and not the stranger who had betrayed me. "Fine," I said finally. "But we do this on my terms. We keep it simple and we focus on reassuring him that he's loved." "Agreed." She nodded, relief washing over her face. "Agreed." That evening, after Ethan finished his homework, Lisa came over. We sat him down in the living room, the three of us together for the first time in months. He looked between us, his eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "What's going on?" he asked. Lisa and I exchanged a glance before I spoke. "Ethan, your mom and I wanted to talk to you about something important. We know you've had questions about why we're not together anymore." His expression turned serious. "Yeah, I just don't get it. You guys seemed happy." Lisa's voice trembled slightly as she chimed in. "Sometimes, even when two people care about each other, they can't make things work. It's not because of you. It's never been because of you." I nodded, my throat tightening. "We both love you more than anything, Ethan. That's one thing that will never change." He looked down at his hands, processing our words. After a long moment, he asked, "But why couldn't you make it work? What happened?" Lisa glanced at me, her eyes pleading for guidance. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes people make mistakes," I said. "Big ones. And those mistakes can hurt the people they care about. But it doesn't mean they stop caring." Ethan looked up at me, his gaze piercing. "What kind of mistakes?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But before I could answer, Lisa spoke. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "What matters is that your dad and I are doing our best to be the best parents we can be for you. That's what we want you to focus on." He nodded slowly, though I could see the gears turning in his head. "Okay, but I'm glad you guys are here, together, even if it's just for this." His words cut deep, but they also filled me with a sense of resolve. No matter how fractured our relationship was, we owed it to Ethan to be a united front when it came to his happiness. After Lisa left, Ethan and I sat together on the couch, the TV playing quietly in the background. He leaned against me, his head resting on my shoulder. "Dad?" he said softly. "Yeah, buddy? I think I get it. You and Mom aren't perfect, but you're still my parents. And I love you both." My chest tightened, and I wrapped an arm around him. "We love you too, Ethan. More than anything." As the night wore on, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The conversation hadn't been easy, but it was a step forward. For Ethan, for Lisa, and for myself. The past would always be a part of us, but it didn't have to define our future. Autumn gave way to winter, and with it came the first snowfall. Ethan was ecstatic, racing out to the backyard to build a snowman while I watched from the kitchen window, a cup of steaming coffee warming my hands. His laughter carried through the crisp air, a sound that filled me with both pride and a twinge of guilt. No matter how much effort I put into rebuilding our lives, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had let him down. Sarah's presence had become a steady comfort in our lives. She often joined us for dinner, her easygoing nature a perfect counterbalance to the tension that occasionally lingered between Ethan and me. Over time, she had grown closer to Ethan, becoming more than just a friend to me. Watching them together filled me with a hope I hadn't felt in years. But there were still challenges to face. Lisa's call to confront our past had opened wounds I thought were healing, and it became clear that I needed to do more than just bury my pain. I needed to face it. One evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, Sarah and I sat in the living room. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting a warm glow across the room. She was curled up on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand, while I sat in the armchair, staring into the flames. "You've been quiet tonight," she said, her voice gentle but probing. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Just thinking. About." I hesitated, but her patient gaze encouraged me to speak. "About everything. Ethan, Lisa, us. I feel like I'm constantly trying to hold things together, but I'm not sure if I'm doing enough." She set her glass down and leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Jake, you're doing more than enough. You're an amazing father, and you've created a stable, loving home for Ethan. That's what matters." "But is it?" I asked, my voice tinged with frustration. "I've spent so much time avoiding the pain, pretending it's not there. How can I move forward when I haven't really dealt with the past?" Sarah reached over and placed a hand on mine. "Maybe it's time to stop avoiding it. Confronting the past doesn't mean you're stuck in it. It means you're giving yourself permission to heal." Her words stayed with me long after she left that night. I knew she was right. I had been so focused on protecting Ethan and rebuilding our lives that I hadn't allowed myself the chance to process my own pain. The next morning, I made a decision. I called Lisa. "Jake?" she answered, her voice tinged with surprise. "We need to talk," I said. "Not about Ethan. About us. About everything." There was a pause, and then she said, "Okay, when?" "Today," I replied. "Come over around 2. She agreed, and I spent the rest of the morning trying to prepare myself. When she arrived, I greeted her with a nod and gestured for her to sit in the living room. The fire was lit, casting a warm glow over the room, but the atmosphere between us was anything but warm. "Thanks for coming," I said, taking a seat across from her. "Of course," she replied, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Lisa, I've been holding on to a lot of anger. At you, at Marcus, at myself. And it's been eating away at me. I need to let it go." Her eyes widened, and she looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jake, Let me finish," I said, cutting her off gently. "I'm not saying this to absolve you or to erase what happened. What you and Marcus did hurt me more than I can put into words. But holding on to that pain isn't helping anyone. Not me, not Ethan, not even you." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I've spent so much time hating myself for what I did," she said. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm sorry, truly." Her apology felt genuine, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something close to peace. "I appreciate that," I said, "and I forgive you, not for your sake but for mine. I need to move forward, Lisa. We both do." Tears streamed down her face, and she nodded. "Thank you, Jake. That means more than you know." After she left, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't a magic fix, and the pain didn't disappear overnight, but I knew I had taken an important step. That evening, as I sat with Ethan and Sarah, the warmth of the fire illuminating their faces, I felt a sense of clarity. Life was messy and unpredictable, but it was also filled with moments of beauty and connection. For the first time, I truly believed we could break the cycle of pain and build something stronger, something real, and that thought filled me with hope for the future. The holidays arrived with their usual flurry of activity. Lights adorned the houses in our neighborhood, their warm glow reflecting off the freshly fallen snow. Ethan was buzzing with excitement as Christmas approached, his list to Santa filled with everything from basketball gear to the latest video games. It was a joy to see him so happy, his youthful enthusiasm untouched by the weight of the past year. Sarah had become a central figure in our lives, joining us for Thanksgiving and now helping Ethan and me decorate our modest apartment for Christmas. She brought a box of homemade ornaments, each one a small work of art. "This one's my favorite," she said, holding up a delicate snowflake made of wood and painted in shimmering silver. "My dad and I made it when I was Ethan's age." Ethan's eyes widened. "Can we make some too, Dad?" I glanced at Sarah, who smiled encouragingly. "Of course," I said. "We'll make it a new tradition." Ethan beamed, and Sarah's hand brushed mine as we reached for the same string of lights. The touch was fleeting but filled with meaning, a quiet acknowledgement of how far we'd come. Christmas Eve arrived, and with it came a surprise. Lisa called that morning, her tone hesitant but hopeful. "Jake, I've been thinking," she began. "I know it's last minute, but I was wondering if I could stop by tonight, just for a little while. I'd like to see Ethan open a gift." Her request caught me off guard. We hadn't spent a holiday together since the divorce, and the thought of her joining us brought a mix of emotions. "I don't know, Lisa," I said cautiously. "I'll need to talk to Ethan about it." "Of course," she said quickly. "Whatever he's comfortable with." After I hung up, I sat Ethan down. "Your mom called," I said. "She'd like to come by tonight for a little bit. What do you think?" Ethan considered this, his expression thoughtful. "I think it would be nice," he said finally. "Christmas is about family, right?" His maturity struck me, and I nodded. "It is, buddy. If you're okay with it, so am I." That evening, Lisa arrived just as we were finishing dinner. She looked nervous, clutching a small gift bag in her hands. Sarah greeted her warmly, offering her a glass of wine, while Ethan bounded over to show her the decorations he had helped create. "You've outdone yourself," Lisa said, her smile genuine as she admired the tree. "It was a team effort," I said, catching Sarah's eye. She returned the smile, her presence a steadying force in an otherwise uncertain situation. We moved to the living room, where Ethan eagerly handed out gifts. His excitement was infectious, and for a little while the tension dissolved. Lisa and I exchanged small talk, and while the conversation felt awkward at times, it was free of hostility. When it was time for Lisa to leave, she pulled me aside. "Thank you for letting me be here," she said, her voice earnest. "It means more than you know." "Ethan wanted you here," I replied, "and it's Christmas. Felt like the right thing to do." She nodded, her eyes misting. "Merry Christmas, Jake." "Merry Christmas, Lisa." As she left, I felt a sense of closure. It wasn't a perfect reunion, but it was a step forward. For Ethan, for her, and for me. Later that night, as Sarah and I sat by the fire, she rested her head on my shoulder. "You did a good thing tonight," she said. "It wasn't easy," I admitted, "but it felt right." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with warmth. "You're a good man, Jake. Ethan's lucky to have you, and so am I." Her words wrapped around me like a blanket, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but I was ready to face them. With Sarah by my side and Ethan as my anchor, we were building something strong, something lasting. As the clock struck midnight, I whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for the second chances life had given me. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was mine, and that was enough. The arrival of the new year brought with it a sense of renewal. The snow outside began to melt, revealing the promise of spring underneath. For the first time in what felt like years, I looked at the calendar with a sense of optimism rather than dread. The past was still a part of me, but it no longer defined my every thought or action. I was moving forward, and so was Ethan. Sarah had seamlessly become a part of our lives, though we were careful not to rush things. Ethan's happiness remained my priority, and his growing bond with Sarah was both reassuring and heartwarming. She brought out a side of him I hadn't seen in a long time, carefree, joyous, and full of laughter. And she brought out a side of me I thought I'd lost forever. One crisp Saturday morning, Ethan and I went to the park. It was our routine, a way to spend quality time together and let him burn off some energy. He brought his basketball, determined to practice his free throws on the court near the playground. "Watch this, Dad," he called, dribbling the ball with impressive precision for a 12-year-old. I watched as he lined up his shot, his form focused and steady. The ball arced beautifully before swishing through the net. "Nice shot, buddy," I cheered, clapping. "You're going to give Steph Curry a run for his money soon." Ethan grinned, jogging over to pick up the ball. "You think so?" "Absolutely," I said. "Just keep practicing and believing in yourself." As we played, Sarah arrived, carrying a thermos of hot cocoa. "Hey, you too," she said, her smile bright as she approached. "Looks like I'm just in time to see some basketball greatness." Ethan beamed. "You can watch me make another shot." Sarah laughed. "I'd love to." We spent the morning together, playing, laughing, and sipping cocoa. The simplicity of the moment reminded me of what truly mattered: family, love, and the connections we choose to nurture. Later that week, I received an unexpected call from Marcus. Seeing his name on the screen sent a ripple of unease through me, but I decided to answer. "Jake," he began, his voice hesitant. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I just wanted to check in, to see how you and Ethan are doing." "We're fine," I said curtly, my guard still firmly in place. "Why are you calling, Marcus?" He sighed. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. Therapy, actually. Has helped me understand a lot about myself and the damage I caused. I don't expect forgiveness, Jake, but I needed to tell you that I'm truly sorry for everything." I was silent for a moment, processing his words. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally. "But Marcus, you need to understand that what happened can't be undone. I've moved on, and so has Ethan. That's where my focus is now." "I understand," he said quietly. "I just needed you to hear it. Take care of yourself, Jake. And Ethan, too." As I hung up, I felt a surprising sense of closure. Marcus's apology didn't erase the past, but it allowed me to put it to rest. The chapter was closed, and I was ready to move forward without looking back. Spring arrived with bursts of color and new life. Ethan's basketball team began their season, and I never missed a game, cheering him on from the sidelines. Sarah often joined me, her support for both of us unwavering. Our relationship had deepened, and while we hadn't defined it with words, we both knew where it was headed. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I turned to her. "Sarah, I want to say thank you for everything, for being there for me and Ethan, for being patient. You've brought so much light into our lives." She reached for my hand, her touch gentle and steady. "Jake, you've done the same for me. I wasn't sure I'd ever find something real again, but with you, it feels right. Like home." Her words filled me with warmth, and I realized that I wasn't just moving forward. I was building a future that felt whole and hopeful. As the months passed, our lives continued to grow and evolve. Ethan thrived, his confidence soaring both on and off the court. Lisa and I found a balanced co-parenting rhythm, our interaction civil and focused on what was best for Ethan. And Sarah became an irreplaceable part of our little family, her presence a constant source of joy. One sunny afternoon, as we sat in the stands watching Ethan's team win another game, I glanced at Sarah and smiled. She caught my eye and squeezed my hand, her expression mirroring my own contentment. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And as I watched Ethan celebrate with his teammates, his laughter ringing out across the court, I knew we had found something far more valuable than perfection. We had found peace, and with it, the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.